good. Thanks for sticking around for this. I'm going to try to make it super engaging and whatever, so you're not, falling asleep or whatever. Modern CSS in real life. I'm Chris Coyier. I could tell you some things about CSS, like it's gotten a lot better recently. It's more interoperable across browsers. The browsers are evergreen now, so you have to worry about the system of CSS is better. It's more logical to understand. All that stuff is true, but it's a little boring. I wanted to connect everything that I'm going to show you about CSS today to real-world stuff. I'm not going to talk about it unless I can connect it to a real-world situation or a real live production website, if we can. But you know what I'm really excited about CSS is that dot, which is actually a Venn diagram of websites and websites that have CSS on them. They're all, every website, it turns out. So it kind of matters, it turns out. Frameworks matter too, but you learn about a new framework, you're lucky to use it once in your life. CSS you're going to use forever. This is applicable stuff, kids. It's really a pie chart. Yeah, I kind of ruined the joke. I already said it. Website, yeah. We're going to do 5 things so you can count them down so you know where we're at. It's good to have wayfinding in your talk, I find. Let's talk about layout a bunch, and let's connect it to a real-world website right away if we can. This is a screenshot of a very cool article, first published on CNN. Sorry, I know they kind of fell from good graces recently. But this is a pretty good article by Leah Asmalash, photographs by Gabrielle and Gotti Jones, focusing on photographs of Black and non-binary surfers. Really, I encourage you to go check it out. It's almost like a photo gallery of awesome photographs, really worth checking out. But we're not even going to scroll down in this. We're just going to focus on this for a little while and see if we can improve it in some ways that are relevant to users. First of all, there's not a lot of diversity in coverage of surfers to begin with. A little bit of diversity in disability. This is Bethany Hamilton, who's a shark ate off her arm and still is one of the best surfers in the world. That's pretty cool, pretty good feel-good story. No wonder the New York Times covered it, kind of a big deal. She's not alone, though. There's also Maya Franklin, who a shark bit off her head, still a professional surfer. That's crazy. She still surfs. She can't see anything. Anyway, this is the real article. Not a joke article, beautiful article. I'd like to say that a designer designed this. Probably a team of designers, probably a team of developers that worked there, they thought about this, they made it. Maybe it's a template, maybe it's a one-off. It's kind of one of those art-directed articles that has a more unique experience of scrolling through it than it does maybe your average article on CNN. I think they did a pretty good job overall, so I'm not trying to pick it apart. I'm just trying to use it as a kind of a cool example. We're now like a decade and a half into responsive design, so of course it works on small screens and large screens. Good job. Kind of table stakes these days. Just wanted to point that out. We're going to focus on the desktop one for a minute and kind of focus on the middle area because the article's kind of constrained generally the content to that area. So if we're writing some kind of old school CSS, maybe we do it like this. Not old school really, but kind of like CSS as of 5 minutes ago. We would use max width to constrain it. We would center it with auto margins on either side, and we'd set it to be one browser window height with viewport units. Maybe if we're using some newfangled stuff that we'll talk about, rather than using width, we'd say the inline size of it is actually the same as width. We now have a shorthand to set margins on both sides with one property. Kind of nice, not bad. Rather than saying height, maybe we'll call it the block size and then use dynamic viewport units instead. We'll get to what those mean in a second, but we need to kind of talk about some things. What does inline mean? We just used it twice or 3 times there. It's kind of a newish keyword called a logical property in CSS. It's pretty cool. I think it might help you remember it if you think of me and a crayon. So let's do that. Inline means that way. Think of my dumb illustrations when you're trying to remember it. The direction of how text flows in the current language you're in is the inline direction. So in right to left and left to right languages, it's that way. You know, I think you can maybe see where this is going with the block direction. Let me get out my crayon again. Stuff that goes that way. That's the block direction, perpendicular to the flow of text. So in left to right languages, like English, Spanish, French, English, whatever, inline is that way. for you guys, that way. And right to left languages like Arabic, still that way, works that way. So if we're thinking about the layout of a website, things that are horizontal to each other like that, inline block. Got it. You got it. You got it. Let's do a quiz. Pop quiz time. What about if someone, a weird 3 boxes like that laid out, that blue stripe I just put on the left there, we'd call that border left, right? In CSS, you can wake up, people, that's border left. No, it isn't. It's border inline start. It's on the inline direction of the text, and you say start. So rather than saying border left, you say border inline start. The padding, same thing. That's the padding in the inline direction at the start of the text. Got it? Good. What's that? Is that the width? Little bastard. No, it's the inline size. It's in the inline direction of the text. What's the size of that? What about that border on the bottom? Border block end. Yeah, you got it. What about the space in between there? If it was flexbox or grid, maybe you'd say that's gap. But let's say we've selected all the children and we're applying a right margin on it. Right margin? No. Margin in the inline end direction. Well, why doesn't the last one have margin on it then if I selected all the children? Oh, because on the parent element, I said trim the inline end of the margin. That's a brand new CSS thing. Super cool. Maybe you didn't know about that. Very useful to just find whatever the last element is and whisk the margin off the butt of it like that. And then that's the block size rather than the inline size. Quiz over. Boring, boring. Next stuff. If you've been writing CSS for a while and I just told you that you're supposed to use those names instead of the other names, you might be like, that's weird. That's hard. Did you drive here? That was harder, probably. You've learned harder things. I just think they're kind of cool because the longer you're in computers and crap, you know that the systems you build around things matter. Naming things matter. So the more logical things get, that's good, especially for people that are learning. In this case, I think the words are more consistently used. So what do I mean by that? I mean something like width is now inline size. It doesn't, there's some caveats to this, but let's roll with it. Instead of the right property, I mean how far is it inset from the end of the inline direction? A little more verbose, but it's a little bit more meaningful in what that property does. Margin left, no, margin from the inline start. Then there's weird ones like overflow X in CSS. That's the only place that in all of CSS that they use X. And you're supposed to be like, oh, X, like the X-axis. It's not geometry class. Get out of here. Overflow inline. This one is a weird one-off in CSS too. Resize horizontal. It's the only place in CSS you use the word horizontal. It's not like hard to understand, but if you say inline instead, now it's part of a more cohesive system. Kind of nice. I'll give the trophy, text align, make it at the start of the inline direction. Don't say left, because the second it's a right to left language, it's meaningless. Anyway, a little more trophy style on the right, I'd say. Rachel Andrew made the point at one point, just kind of talking about logical properties, but more like talking about CSS as a whole, that CSS has changed so much over the years that it used to be taught, even by people like me, as this quirky, weird language that has all kinds of bugs and crap in it, and you just got to learn it, because that's the way it is, and you got to clear the float, otherwise it fucking collapses, or whatever, You don't have to do that stuff anymore. CSS has gotten better to the point that it's a system. It's a system, camera. That was a good job. I just think that's cool, and it changes the way that you think about it. I've had way less hallway conversations here about like CSS. There's still some people who are like, CSS, that sucks and it's hard or whatever. But it's not like CSS is a bad language. It's more like, conceptually, I have trouble with it, or I can't make my sites look pretty. Not like, this whole thing sucks, Anyway, here's another point to logical properties that's a little bit more important. You got a button, there's an icon in the button. How do you space out that icon, a little SVG sucker or whatever it is, and the word? Could use gap or something, it depends, there's always multiple ways, but usually it's something like, I don't know, margin right? Well, the second that's translated then, and we're going to get to that in a minute, margin right is now wrong. That's funnier than I thought it would be. The spacing is in the wrong place, obviously, right? Sad trombone. If we were to use margin inline end instead, it would work. So good. We had to refactor nothing, no additional CSS to write. We just used the correct property, and now we have the value there. Let's take a look in the context of this really cool article. focusing on that thing down in the bottom left there. Old school style, this is the actual CSS that's at play, or pretty close to it. It has a width set, it's position absoluted down into the bottom left corner, and for some reason they set text align on it, which actually is weird, and you don't need to because the default is left actually. If we were to replace that, how'd I do? Yeah, we're still doing basically the same stuff, only instead of saying bottom left, we're saying inset block end, inset inline start. It's kind of the same as bottom left in a language like that, but watch what happens when we translate this thing. What's going to happen? It's going to be worth it. Now, we use a tool, Google Translate. We'll see how many people use that. It's nuts. And we get, oh, I think I jumped ahead. Oh, just a smidge there, huh? Anyway, yeah, so close. Yeah, this is the right thing. What it did then is instead of being on the bottom left, now that we're in a right to left language, it has also moved that position absoluted block down over here. Nice, not bad. I actually showed this to a woman I know who speaks fluent Arabic and reads, of course. And she was like, yeah, pretty good, you know, got the words just right and everything. But I was like, but wouldn't it be, there's a moment, I think I screwed up a slide or something. There's a moment where it translated this website and it was still stuck down over there. And she's like, that's fine. And I was like, oh, you ruined my thing. I was hoping you to tell that it was bad. But she's like, oh, no, but when you translate a website, like, it just sucks, you know? Like, if the words are anywhere near correct, like, that's a win. And I'm like, that's not good enough. So I used the logical properties and got that, and she's like, oh, that is way better, nice. You know, now it looks like an actual website in Arabic, not bad. I say so close because that stupid black thing, which those designers at CNN definitely designed to put over there to be behind the text so it was more readable, didn't flop because CSS, as imperfect as it is, hasn't yet gotten around to doing like directional gradients. You can't say, it's jumping ahead, you stupid thing. Directional, great, you know what I mean. I have to say, like, if I could say to inline end, meaning please reverse it when the text direction reverses, we'd get that, and then we would fucking nail it. That would have been awesome. But unfortunately, we'd probably have to write a little custom CSS to get that. But that's nice. Just a few CSS tweaks that I applied to it, it made this website translate a lot easier. Now you might say, I built a lot of websites in my life. I've never had translation be one of the business goals. Fine, I have, but maybe you haven't. And I get that it's not often. Maybe it wasn't at CNN either. There's no language picker on the article or anything like that. The problem is, you don't have to, it doesn't have to be a business requirement. People are gonna do it anyway. This is the Google Translate plugin in the store, which, I don't know, 10, I think that's probably the highest number in their CMS-y thing or whatever, so that's a shitload of users right there. Then there's just translate.google.com, which you don't have to install, which SimilarWeb, which is often quoted for traffic numbers, says 713 million people used it last month, so a little bit of traffic on that. So you see, people are just translating your website. They're not asking you if it's okay if they translate your website. They just are doing it. Chrome-based browsers, generally this one is an ARC, if you can see that pretty well. Sometimes you're on a language that knows it's not your language because you have it set. It just offers to translate it anyway, which there's no metrics for that. So it's like, yeah, dude, people are doing this, I promise you. I just mentioned it strongly because I've gotten pushed back like that. Like, why use logical properties? My boss doesn't care if our website is translatable. And you're like, well, I guess you can't fight that. But you could say that, like, yeah, but they are, though. So this whole article is full of IMG tags. Now, even this top one, which the temptation for me would be use background image because you're putting crap on top of it and it's just easier. But even that top one, to their credit, is an actual IMG tag in the HTML, which is good because it's part of the content. Of course it's part of the content. Then that's important. The problem is they got so close. It's all images all the way down with no alt text on any of them, which is a little unfortunate because it's kind of the point of the article is describing the images. A little gray area because it's like an artist's images, and you're like, who's in charge then of the alt text? Like maybe if you could get the original artist to write them, that would be ideal. Probably not super great to have it be like the intern's first job, to be like, woman water. Yeah. Like, do a good job if you're going to do it. Jake had a great article saying that you don't do women water, right? Like, images make you feel certain ways, and you should probably attempt to evoke that in the alt text rather than the cold, hard facts. I don't know. Sometimes the facts are good, though, to let people come to their own emotional conclusions. Not sure. But certainly, there should have been some alt text to these images. That would have been an improvement. This one, the way that you could make that happen is pretty easy these days. Just be like, just be as wide as the browser is. That's cool. And then be as tall as the browser is. See, I've reverted also to non-logical properties, just because, like, sometimes width is just width. Like, just because you're in Japan, they don't, like, look at all their images sideways. You know, like, it's still that way. But anyway, so the height is then these dynamic viewport units. And sometimes when you mess with the width and height of an image, have you seen it when it squishes? Well, that sucks. You know, don't squish, especially an artist's image. That would be uncool. But you can say, don't squish it, just crop it with something like object fit. Pretty nice trick there. Now, we're using viewport units, long been like a little jab in the side of some developers, especially mobile developers that try to use them for this reason. Let's say I have a headline. I'm doing the thing with the photo, as tall as the browser when I want to put the headline down there. Looks fine on desktop, but as soon as I do mobile, or I do it something like that, you know, it's a relative box, so I can absolutely position inside it, whatever. But as soon as I do that, look at where it cuts off. That's just really simple CSS. How they decided that this little stupid URL bar should just totally overlap the content, I will never understand it. It's just unbelievable how many buttons, checkout buttons, have been just fucking trapped behind that URL bar, never to be clicked. It's just unbelievable to me. But anyway, they did fix it, to their credit. They being CSS gods or whatever, whoever fixes these things. If all you do is just, even the height, just use DVH instead of VH, it's cool, right? Here's a tiny little movie that's like, oh, now it's at the bottom. Now, for once in our lives, it's actually the size of the freaking viewport. Even if I hide the URL bar, it gets sucked down, because it's like, oh, I have more space now. It's dynamic. Oh, I put it back. Oh, it bumps up again. It's the actual size of the actual viewport. Just unbelievable that we have to do that. But please, just use DVH. It's like flop it out pretty much wherever. I think it's a good idea. All right. Grid layout, let's do that one a little bit. Pretty fun. Some stats on the usage of grid. We're doing horribly. Bad job, everybody. Not enough people using grid. Flexbox, it's okay. It was good for CSS tricks with our little guide, but the fact that so many people went to that guide was kind of testament to how unlearnable it was. Anyway. Grid is way easier to learn. It's way easier to reach for grid, I think. Although this is heavily skewed by like if WordPress ships like one block with Flexbox in it, it's like, you know, and nobody actually wrote that. They just are using something, you know, or Squarespace or Shopify or anything. They probably use Flexbox a bunch. I don't think this represents like developers reaching for these technologies, but still, it's some data. Anyway. Do actual websites use grid? While I was working on this, I had like a bunch of tabs open. I'm like, let me just see. Because you can pop open DevTools, and if it just says grid on a little DOM node, you're like, oh, they're using it. Pretty simple metric. I checked my email. They are using grid. CodePen uses grid all over the place. I think a lot of us are using grid. It's a wonderful thing. I'm not going to dwell on even what grid is. It's just a good layout mechanism. But I am going to talk about subgrid and use my amazing drawing skills to explain what it is. This is relevant because it's just about to drop. It's in Firefox and Safari. Chrome lagged on it a little bit, but I hear a little birdie say, it's coming soon to Chrome. So this is just about to drop. The idea is, let's say you have an element, it's got grid on it. I've established these grid lines. Now I'm going to place an element on the grid. The idea then is like, what happens to that element? Does it need to set up its own grid if I need to put stuff on a grid in there? But you can kind of just say, if I want to, if it's relevant, inherit the grid lines of the parent. I'll explain that one other way. Oops. It's like I have this pink grid. I've placed a blue element on it. I can do whatever I want in the blue. It doesn't matter what I do. But if it's useful, I can suck in those grid lines from the parent if it's useful. So I could line up something just down here because it knows about the parent grid. I think it's going to be more useful than you might originally think. I think that's going to have some real world implication that's useful. A lot of people, I've heard Figma mentioned a bunch of times today, online tool, I'm sure you've heard it. It sounds like the government's going to block that acquisition. Pretty weird. I don't know how that's going to go, but anyway. I was thinking, do they use Grid? Like, what do they do, not to just for us to use Figma, but how do they build Figma? Like, how is that sidebar laid out? And as I was snooping around in the dev tools, the reason that is a very complicated sidebar of stuff. In order to make that look any good at all, I think they had to have a pretty strict grid and place things on that grid so that it feels good. And every one of those elements, they set up that grid over and over and over and over again, the same grid on it. It made me think of subgrid, because you could have a parent, you could have it inherit the grid lines from the parent, and then you're doing less repetitive work kind of thing. I don't know how well it would work for rows, it might, but anyway, that's kind of why that I think looks so good and cohesive, is because there's a bunch of CSS grid usage going on. Another newish thing for grid, or Pinterest, your mom probably uses it. I don't know, was that rude? Maybe. I don't think you're supposed to do that anymore. Anyway, they kind of pioneered this look that's kind of like a brick wall or whatever, and then David DeSandro made masonry, and everybody was hot on that look for a while, because it's so unusual looking on the web. The way those things are laid out, the web doesn't flow like that normally. So you have to do something special to get that to work. Sure, they called it masonry layout. Pinterest still looks like that. God bless them, they did not change. They're like, that's Pinterest layout forever. We'll never change it. It is kind of a cool look. It feels like kind of infinite, or I don't know. It kind of works for their style. Anyway, I made a website reviewing breakfast burritos a while back. Probably not the healthiest choice I ever made, but I reviewed a ton of breakfast burritos and wrote little reviews of them. And then I laid them out in a grid, and I left it like this on purpose, because I was like, they're all different. And then if you set up in grid, you can tell it to stretch the items if you want, but then there'd just be a bunch of white space below the review. So I left it all ragged like that on purpose. But the ragged is a good point, because now in grid, we'll see if this is actually how it ships across all browsers, but in Firefox, at least right now, you can just say, those grid template rows? Just say grid template rows masonry. It's just one thing, and immediately rows are wiped out, and you get the staggering effect on the rows instead. And what's maintained is that you still generally tab in the logical order of the text, that was always kind of the hard thing to figure out, is that sure, I could make it look like that with columns or something, but then the tab order is up and down, which is not what you want. You want to maintain that inline direction thing. I was about to say horizontal, but that word is out. All right, well, let's move on from all that and talk about container queries and units. Pretty hot stuff. Container queries kick ass, but they get all the credit, right? So let's start with container units instead. Twist, a little twist. And what I mean by units is they're like pixels or rems or percentages or whatever. See those weird looking things? Those are container units. Super weird, super cool. Here's a real world example. I'm telling you, kids, you gotta do something about your mobile headline sizes. Let's say we set up a website, a little desktop-y kind of thing, stupid article, whatever, and then we do what every website has done for 15 years and put a meta tag on it that says, I'm ready for responsive design. Responsive design, hit me. Then we get that, which is not okay. If we didn't do anything special about the font size, it's just not good. You got to shrink it. You got to do something about the fonts, right? So what you do is you're like, okay, I'll just do a media query, and then my header is smaller now, or whatever. Kind of fine. You should probably use rems. I should probably swap that out. Don't use pixels anyway. But anyway, that kind of works. That's okay, but that's one of 1,000 things you got to do, and resizing text and stuff. Here's just a cool thing you can do now, especially that this is dropped across all browsers. Go, no, go. I'm going to squeeze the browser, and it's going to re-show you how sucky that is. Then, crucially, I have to make it a container, so you have to do this thing. That's the minimum you have to do to make it a container. Now it's a container. You can't use container units until it's a container, right? And now I'm just going to use weird new container query units. Now, what? That's sick. That's not sick. That's sick. The medium one is sick, though. Really good, I think. But we'll just constrain it. Max function in CSS, which means min. really logical. It just means don't get any smaller than 24 pixels. But we've just constrained it a little bit. Now we've totally solved that problem. That's a real world ass problem right there that was solved with some very lightweight code. Pretty cool, I think. But you're like, Chris, that was the whole browser window. You know, that's an iframe in CodePen, so it's kind of treated like a whole browser window, but it's not necessarily. Here's just 2 card components. Just watch one of the headers. And as it gets smaller, it gets what kind of relevantly small text, and while the other one's getting bigger. I think there's a world of typography where we just use container units generally in typography, and the type kind of logically resizes to how big it should be based on its component tree. Stephanie Eccles has a kick-ass article that is the best one I've seen about fluid type that leans into the container aspects of it. There's plenty of articles about fluid type out there, but she does it with fluid type with container units in it, and it's the best I've seen so far. So all the love to container units, but of course we got to do container queries too a little bit. Probably a ton of JavaScript people here. I am too, of course. And the JavaScript framework world has kind of taught us all to build websites with components. You build your Legos, and then you use the Legos or whatever. Every single JavaScript framework, as much as they like to fucking bicker at each other, at least they agree on that. They're like, you should compose websites. Composability is wonderful. So you have no idea where these components then are going to be used. If you dump the Lego bricks out on the floor, where that's a website. That perfect rectangle represents a website. Where is your little card component going to go? It's going to go all the way over there? Going to go over here? You don't know. You have no idea that when you built this thing, could be right there. Could be, you don't know. Could be over there. You get it, right? Where you use a component and where it renders is just totally arbitrary when you are building a design system, or when it doesn't even have to be a design. It could just be a React component. It could just be whatever. You might have a design system, you didn't even know it. So here's a calendar component that I made. Right now, it's being rendered pretty big. Now, I'm not going to resize the browser. I'm just going to resize this little bar in between. And notice that, so I can't use media queries because the whole page is not changing in size. I have to use container queries to make that happen. So it hits a certain size, and it's like, I can't be a wide calendar anymore. I don't have room to do it. I crunch. You can write a container query that's like, ooh, I'll just flip sideways then. Oh, that kicks ass. That's so good. You should definitely, I mean, container queries just solves that problem in a way that nothing ever really could. Killer, great, everybody loves them. Raucous applause. And the way that you write it is pretty simple. In fact, browsers that support container queries also generally support nesting. Did you know that? I mean, nesting is dropped in Chrome and Safari. So Firefox is probably not far behind on the fact that you can just put those inside that other selector. That's just fine. You can just do that. You don't have to use Sass or anything. That just works. So you're making it a named container. This is the syntax for that, and then calling the name of the container in the container query. And you can't style the thing that you make. I talked to somebody today that had that exact problem. Is they were tempted to reach into calendar wrap, make it a container, and then start styling it with container queries. You can't. You have to make the parent the container, and then the children you can style. Just a little gotcha. You'll get it. Just look it up. It's probably on MDN. Little homework, style queries. I'm not even going to get into it because there's not enough time, but they're pretty cool and they're related to container queries, and they kind of unlock the mix-in idea of Sass. Pretty cool. Cascade layers, I think this is good. This is a really quick section, but it's going to have some real-world ass stuff in it. I tell you what. Look at those two selectors. Which one is more powerful? Not a trick question. That one is. It's way more powerful. It has, a lot of times you use this comma notation in CSS, how many IDs, classes, and element selectors are on it. That one blows that away, man. That background's going to be blue if those selectors touch the same element. There's no doubt about it. That's been embedded into my brain for as long as I remember. But check this out. This is so bizarre to me. Now you put it in @layer tags in CSS, and now all of a sudden, that dumb little nav tag that has barely any specificity at all totally wins. Totally wipes out that selector just because I've said that the overrides layer, even though it appears earlier in the CSS, is the higher layer. I just declared it. I just said that's the way it's going to be, and it just makes specificity totally irrelevant in this case. It's kind of a ring of power, I would say. which I think is represented by these ducks. That's the best sound. I know you can't hear it barely, but I'll send you later. Email me, I'll send you the ducks. It's an incredible video. That actually isn't super relevant, but I do think it's funny. Totally, it was like, have you ever heard of that? Has anybody heard of that, at layer? They just dropped immediately across all browsers. They're like, every browser that you've used now totally supports that, which to me is like, because it used to be every time you mention anything about CSS, they're like, you get off stage and they're like, Chris, when can I use it? And you're like, what? Do I look like a wizard? I don't know. Later. Now, today. Miriam Suzanne says that type of cascade conflict crap, why isn't my CSS doing the thing I told my CSS to do, is a problem in CSS. And the intention of this, while it's a new feature and possibly complicates CSS a little bit, solves some of that complexity of well, I have a point to make. Let's do that first. Bootstrap, super popular. Everybody's used it, I guarantee it. Incredibly. They did a good job, right? There's been a refreshing lack of AI crap at this conference too, but I have to put the little thing in there where I like ask ChatGPT a thing. This actually is barred, I think. But anyway, how popular is it? AI, super popular. 5th of the websites in the world. Of course it knows. It analyzes words. That's the perfect data set to know that information. Okay, but we're going to use Bootstrap on a website. Bootstrap prescribes you some classes to use. Oh, I want a cool-looking card. I'll use the card class then. And then you're like, okay, now it's my job as the intern at this here agency to change the margin of the H5 tag. So I'm going to use the H5 selector, and it's not going to work. Of course it's not going to work. Everybody knows that's not going to work. That's not specific enough. How specific does it need to be? Can I use .card title? Is that going to win? What does Bootstrap do internally? Is that strong enough? Do I have to do card title? You ever use that trick? That might win. Maybe H5 card title will win because just the H5 is like just enough to get it. Or should I say, screw it, I'm just going to put an ID on it. Or, more likely, you're just going to put important on it because fuck it. Fuck it. And they do a lot. Here's a cool solution to this problem that just wipes that problem away forever. It's one word. You just, when you're importing Bootstrap, of course, the entire like 18 megabytes of it from some CDN, because that's how you all roll. Layer. You don't even have to name it. Just say layer. Now it's in a layer, which means it's a lower layer than anything you write. So that H5 now, despite the fact that I just didn't even bother looking at what Bootstrap did for specificity, I automatically win. That's awesome. Little new for this stuff. I think it'll be hard to go to work on Monday and be like, we're going to layer all our CSS. Nah, that's going to be tough. I think I would greenfield it on stuff first, maybe. I feel like this kind of thing is going to be common, a little hierarchy of needs or something, where your utilities are super powerful and your reset stuff doesn't do anything. Maybe if I was building third-party CSS, I would layer it. Wow. I would layer it for other people's benefit, you know? Anyway. Some new color stuff we got to talk about. New colors just dropped. Squirple. Never heard of it? Here it is. Hold up, bud. Hold up. There's new colors, brand new ones. Jay just shipped them, so get ready. All right, this is the best that I can explain it. There's the world, which as best I know has all the colors. Every color is represented in the world. Not that photo of the world, like the real, actual world. But when we invented stupid computers, they're not as good as the world. They're less good as the world. So we made them 16 color, then 256, then 1024, then whatever. Then we invented web-safe colors, and now there's thousands, then millions in colors. Now, if you buy a new iMac, there's billions of colors that are capable of being displayed by that thing. But guess what we forgot to do? We forgot to make CSS capable of displaying billions of colors. Little oversight, catching up. So literally, like you pick your color picker and you go pick a really bright color from your cool sunset photo, it'll just guess and be really wrong. Like we're at the days where if you had like a background and it was using a bright color, and then you color pick and then tell it to be that background around, it just won't even match because it just can't get anywhere close to the cool sunset color. So anyway, if there's too much to talk about with color, it's amazing. There's one thing I want you to remember about color is which is a function in CSS, it looks like any other color like RGB or HSL, where you just give it 3 values, lightness, chroma, hue. This is super powerful and good to know about. So let's just focus on that one for a minute, shall we? OK, LCH being a color model, lightness, chroma, hue. Like I said, it's a way to describe a color. The OK part of it, I think, just means a little better. There's a LCH version too, and it's like, it's this, but this one's okayer. So just remember that, very important, which is different than a color space. What OK LCH gives you access to, for one thing, is keep clicking too many times, is the P3 color space. So here's RGB down here, lots of colors, served us for a long time, really good. That white line, we gotta go, yeah, okay. Got access to a lot more colors just through access to that. We're living through an era where TV screens used to be all blurry and crappy. We're living through an era where colors are going to look dull until we start using newer, more vibrant color spaces, which is kind of a big deal. That's the color space that we're dealing with. Really complicated stuff, again, designed by a real person. It's a bit of a secret weapon in that websites that use these bolder colors are kind of a extra powerful thing. Designers are being like, holy crap, these new colors are changing the game for me. Really amazing. The way that these colors work, you can change the lightness and the hue on things, and it's logical. The amount of brightness on the colors are consistent. So if I use the same brightness across a bunch of different colors, make a gradient out of it, you can rely on the brightness of those colors across the thing. They're all the same as bright of each other, which is not true of other color. I call this demo, the humanity. I love that. We gotta get going though, because this is almost over. I do want to show you that it's possible now to say what color space you want a gradient to be in. Yellow to blue, what the fuck was that? That's crazy. Just by saying it's in a different color space, you get a totally different output on gradients, which is amazing. Turns out OK Lab is generally the best one to do that in, but it's kind of good to know that color spaces are a thing. If you're having trouble remembering OKLCH, because it's hard, what did Chris say? Just think, Oklahoma. Then you'll remember it. That's good. Got to get you out of here. I got the get out of here machine going on. Relative color syntax is interesting. We have to end with this one, though. Mobile websites, just play around in your phone for 2 seconds and you'll see that everything you do moves. Unbelievable how much animation there is on it. There's a new API that you got to know about, so write this down before you can go. It's called the View Transitions API. That's one line. Absolutely incredible what it can do. We're going to skip my dumb little demo here where I just hello world it. To do stuff like this, as a list, I can say, I'm going to remove something from the list, but before it goes away, transition it away. And make space for this. I'm not barely writing any animation code for this, and this is the kind of thing that you get for free. I've written no animation code whatsoever to make this kind of thing work. You click one, it's a grid layout, and it just says, the first one, just put it on the top and make it wider. You just kind of get this for free in the web platform now, which matches very well to what mobile websites can do. Last one, absolutely. See this? This is an entire website in HTML. See those links? View transition name 1. That's the only thing that I've added there in addition to that meta tag that's required for this to work. And it's going to link to this page. Also, ridiculously simple piece of HTML. But see where the view transition name 1 on that link is? That it matches the view transition name there? That's all I've done. I wrote no JavaScript, no special CSS other than these inline things, no animation code at all. Those are the 4 links. This is what the result is. That's whack. That's incredible to me. You just get that for free in web browsers. And you press the back button and it triggers it. Stuff that's kind of hard to pull off. This is not an SPA. This is just a stupid HTML website. Trivially easy. Here's one in Astro. You click it. Woo. Look at that. Now we're making websites feel expensive, is what James said. That looks good. So easy. So easy to pull up. So that's the whole thing. We looked at layout. We looked at the life-changing magic of container queries. We looked at Bootstrap isn't a problem anymore. We looked at the new amazing color functions and how that's just going to change how people look at websites. And we looked at view transitions. It's very worth checking out because it changes the game a little bit. Really appreciate render. Hearts, hearts, hearts. Get out of here. Go to the party. Have fun. It's going to be good.